Hello and welcome to Learn Spanish a lo Boricua. It's time for class. In today's episode, we're reviewing the conversation we had in the previous episode, the one that came out on the 4th of July, called Ningún de Independencia. We'll be going over some vocab, some phrases. I'll give you one grammar example, and we'll also look at the three most prominent political parties in Puerto Rico, just to reiterate the information that Alfredo shared in the past episode. Not going to go deep into politics. Number one, it's certainly not my area of expertise. And number two, I myself, not being Puerto Rican, not having grown up here, don't have much of a leg to stand on as far as giving opinions about the politics and etc. As always, I recommend that you view today's episode on YouTube. The link to do so is right there in the episode notes or in the episode description. You will also find in the episode notes the link to our Patreon page. We are creating transcripts of our conversations so that you can follow along and never miss a word again. We've got a couple to catch up on that are kind of in the middle of the podcast, but I would say by the end of this month, we'll have all of the transcripts uploaded into the Patreon page. There's also some other fun vocab, Puerto Rican vocab, and even some listening activities that I have up there. So check it out. It would be a great tool for your learning, for you to really make sure that you're able to follow what's going on in the conversation, that you're learning from this podcast. And we would appreciate it so much as a little bit of financial support for the work we're doing. All right, so check that out in the episode description as well. Of course, you can always find more information about my class offerings, signing up for memberships, even booking a one-on-one consult if you'd like. All of that information is there in the podcast description. Hey, let's get into it. In my mind, today's class is going to be pretty quick, but we'll see. I do get chatty. All right, so again, I mentioned what we're going to be going over today. Take a look at the three, let's say, prominent political parties, and we'll look at some of the vocab and one particular grammar example. So this is exactly what Alfredo had gone over in the episode. I kind of did a tembol to what I'm saying right now, and tembol referring to what I did to Alfredo while he was speaking, which, by the way, that came up last night. I was here, Alfredo said tembol. That is absolutely Puerto Rican slang for timeout, and always accompanied, or usually accompanied with a gesture as well. It's spelled T-E-M-B-O-L, tembol, tembol. Okay, so that was the tembol about tembol. Also in the episode, I gave Alfredo a little tembol because he was starting to go into how some of the political parties, there's a difference in where people fall on the spectrum as far as left and right. What I basically understood to be political parties and political leanings was always just left and right until I came to a place where the politics are divided based on that place's status. So he was at first mentioning that within these parties, you'll find a range of people that lean more towards the right or left. There's certainly sort of an idea that the PNP, the Partido Nuevo Progresista, is a little bit more right, a little bit more Republican, for example, and obviously this would be much more leftist, our independent party, but there is a range of political beliefs within these parties. And he started to mention that, and I said, Tembol, talk to us about the three parties. It was a surprise to me to learn that the parties were not, as I said, divided based on whether you fall left or right on the spectrum of political beliefs, but rather what people want for the status for Puerto Rico. So the three that he mentioned as maybe the primary ones, there's also another one, Victoria Ciudadana, and then another one that's sort of more of a religious, conservative religious party, but I would say these are the three classics. Okay, so we've got El PIP. El PIP stands for Partido Independentista Puertorriqueño. I wrote all of these out in the colors that they're associated with. The Independent Party is associated with green. Their color is green, and they of course want Independencia de los Estados Unidos. They want independence. We have a PNP. So you would have heard me say PNP. That's what people will refer to the people who belong to this party. So it's like saying Democrats. PNP will be referring to the people that belong to el Partido Nuevo Progresista. Los PNPs quieren ser el Estado 51, right? They want to be the 51st state. They are looking for statehood. That is their political foundation. And then we have el Partido Popular Democrático, which is el Partido Popular. You'll hear that people refer to them as los populares. These are independentistas, PNP, populares, and they want to maintain the status of Estado Libre Asociado, exactly what Puerto Rico is at this point. Okay, so those are the three again, and green for Independent Party, blue for PNPs, and red for los populares. Okay, that was it. Again, just wanted to go over that information. I'm not going to give any leanings. Let's go over some of the vocab that came up. Obviously, this came out on 4th of July. The whole episode was about this and about the independence and etc. So we have a couple phrases here that are going to help you on holidays. So first of all, know that un día festivo, un día feriado are dos ways. I was going to say dos ways, very in English accent. Thank you, bilingual brain. Son dos maneras de decir a holiday. Okay, you can say día festivo, día feriado. They're both ways to say a holiday. And just my brain actually went to then sort of the happy holidays. We think of this around the holidays. So las fiestas, when you're more thinking around, Christmas and New Year's, etc. We'll refer to las fiestas o las navidades as well. You'll hear that plural, the Christmases, not sure why, but that's how it's said. And that's how it's said in many places in Latin America. So if we're talking about a specific day, I thought an English word popped up that's just similar to feriado, but then it went away as soon as it came. So we'll leave that. But if it's a day off from work, the Memorial Day is a día feriado, right? Labor Day is a día feriado or día festivo, etc. When you're talking about holidays, it might be las fiestas. When you want to wish somebody happy holidays, it's going to sound like felices fiestas. Felices fiestas is a good way to say happy holidays. Okay, I started off talking about how I've never liked 4th of July because I was scared shitless of fireworks as a kid forever. It went on for a really long time, and I absolutely dreaded this holiday. And fireworks in Spanish are artificial fires. Los fuegos artificiales. Los fuegos artificiales are fireworks. All right, I brought up the word hipócrita, which obviously I think as soon as you hear that, you know what that word is. It's not like this is a big aha moment, but what I wanted to point out is that it will always end in A. Whether you are talking about, if you're calling a man or a woman a hypocrite, it will always be hipócrita. El, hipócrita, la, hipócrita. Okay, watch your emphasis. You need to lift your voice on po. It has the accent mark there. Hipócrita, hipócrita. El o la hipócrita. Hipócrita también se puede usar for hypocritical. So that was what I said. Lo veo como algo hipócrita. I see it as something hypocritical. Okay, so it can be used as the adjective as well as referring to the noun, a person, calling them a hypocrite. Okay, Alfredo mentioned this, and I just wanted to bring this up. Not that I don't, it's not that this is going to be a vocab word that you're using all the time, but it's not something that was, for me, I heard it and knew what it meant because of the context we were talking about, but hearing mediático wouldn't have immediately alerted my English brain to media, but he's using it as an adjective here. So el mayor poder mediático, he's talking about the parties that have the greatest media power, that have a newspaper outlet basically for them to kind of push their agenda. So el mayor poder mediático, he's using media for media in adjective form. That's why we're saying as mediático. He is referring to the greatest media power that are for those majority parties, really, PNP and los populares. Okay, another thing that he used that I wanted to bring up, las potencias mundiales, or is how you would say world powers. Potencias, as meaning powers, might not be something, you can use the word poder or poderes for powers, but you'll hear this a lot in the context of world powers, or even if somebody, let's say a certain country is really competitive in soccer or football, football, as all the Europeans would yell us about. All right, if we're talking about Inglaterra es una potencia en el mundo de fútbol. Okay, Inglaterra es una potencia en el mundo del fútbol, right? England is a power in the world of soccer. It doesn't really sound like what we would say naturally in English, but that's the feel. You will hear it in those contexts. You'll hear about different countries being una potencia, that mean that they're strong in that area, or when you're hearing it straight as potencias mundiales, is going to be world powers. All right, a couple more. I love this word, tergiversar. Tergiversar is the verb. Tergiversa. I had you'll find that this happens to you guys if you practice your vocab in flashcard format or whatever. And if you always see the word in a certain format, especially when it's a verb, right? Let's think of it as a verb to start off with. If you always practice it as tergiversar, tergiversar. That's what I did when I had this on my card. I would see to twist, to distort, and I was like, yes, love this word, tergiversar. I had heard it in a podcast. I even took a little screenshot of what they were referencing when they used this. Well, I have the whole memory of how I learned this word, but I had never practiced it with any other emphasis than it in its infinitive form. Infinitive means the verb's not conjugated. It just means to twist, to walk, to go, to run, to be, to see, to have. All of those are infinitive verb. Once it becomes I walk, he ran, we saw, they watched, whatever, that it's a conjugated verb. Okay, so if you only ever practice it like this, tergiversar, as has happened to me many times, the first time you go to try to use it in a sentence and it's in a different conjugation, you have to change your emphasis, you're going to be stumbling over yourself. So it might be good to also give yourself an example of this word conjugated so you can practice it with different emphasis. Know that the verb is tergiversar, fine. Maybe you can say, muchas veces tergiversan la información según sus propias creencias. Okay, many times they twist or distort the information according to their own beliefs. Muchas veces tergiversan. It still takes me a second, y'all, because this was stamped in my brain as tergiversar. And now I have to go tergiversan. I hope that makes sense. But you'll find that you might want some different forms of a word to practice so that you're not always dependent on the same way of pronouncing it. Then when you suddenly have to pronounce it a different way, you're shit out of luck and blah, 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 struggling to get the word out. Okay? Ellos tergiversan la información según sus propias creencias. Would have been a good card for me to also add. All right. Un pillo is an important word. It's used often here in Puerto Rico, and especially in this context where they'll say los pillos políticos de este país. You'll hear that a lot, okay? Un pillo, it has the two L's in there, so it shouldn't just sound like pillo. That wouldn't have any L's. It has to have a little bit of a y sound, pillo. Un pillo is a thief, okay? So los pillos pilóticos. It's like I'm trying to call them Pilates thieves. Los pillos políticos are political thieves, okay? Un pillo. You're going to hear this in reggaeton as well, I think, un pillo. Paupérrimo. Qué palabra más fancy, Alfredo. Una palabra de domingo aquí. Paupérrimo. It was the first time I'd ever heard this word was when it came out of his mouth in the podcast. So as we were recording, it means very poor, poverty stricken. And he was talking about this when he went to, which I think is the next word that's going to pop up. He was doing grocery shopping and they asked him to donate to education, which is to Puerto Ricans is a little bit of a frustrating point because the point that I made later on in the episode is that there have been, I don't know how many, but I could say upwards of millions of dollars funneled to the island for education, and they have ended up in los bolsillos, in the pockets de los pillos políticos. Okay, for the amount of money that Puerto Rico has received for its educational system, it should be much further along than what it is. Okay, so he was a bit frustrated by that question. All right, so in that same context, I just wanted to bring this up, quite a 180 as far as vibe goes, but hacer compras means to go grocery shopping. Okay, you might learn this in a very like formal, whatever, bland Spanish class, bland Spanish vocabulary, one that's not really geared towards any country. You might hear hacer compras as to go shopping, but hacer compras in Puerto Rico specifically always will refer to grocery shopping. Okay. And Alfredo, towards the end of the episode, he was talking about giving the analogy of when you're living in your parents' house as an adult, that eventually it becomes a little bit too tight. You want to find your own space, your own way, right? So that was in reference to Puerto Rico moving out of mommy and daddy imperialist house. So he said, buscar su propio rumbo, buscar su propio rumbo. Rumbo is like is a path, okay? Not to be confused with rumba, which is a party, okay? Rumba is the thing you're going to hear in songs. It's like rumba. Hey, I feel like I'm hearing Pitbull in my mind. Okay, pero buscar su propio rumbo va a ser como to look for one's own path. Su propio, being own, rumbo, path. Buscar su propio rumbo. If I was talking about me, it would be buscar mi propio rumbo, right? All right, and then he apologized for this sounding like un desahogo, and I needed to share this that I saw on social media. I think I even shared it from Niaita, and Niaita Thomas. You could give her a follow, maybe on Twitter. She writes, desahogar is one of my favorite words in Spanish. It translates to vent. So when he said, maybe this sounds like un desahogo, maybe this sounds like a rant, a vent session. We don't really use vent in a noun form. We usually say, I need to vent. Verb, the action, I need to vent. Okay, but here you can use un desahogo as it's you venting. Okay, might sound like venting. Right? It translates to vent, but if you break down the literal translation, it means to undrown. Ahogar, ahogarse, which please notice that these have H's that are silent, so you just need to delete it from your mind and go A-O, which would sound like desahogo, because if you say desahogo, no one's going to know what you're saying. Okay, the same way if you would someone pronounced thought like thogged, you wouldn't know what the hell they're saying because the G is silent, correct? You cannot pronounce silent letters and expect to be understood. Do not pronounce the silent H. Desahogo, desahogo. Okay, desahogar, ahogar is the root there, means to drown. So desahogar means to undrown, as if letting go of the burdens and secrets you are holding on to will be the thing that saves you from drowning. Ooh, what a beautiful image. And it is. Isn't that beautiful? Ooh, makes me get all the feels. As if letting go of the burdens and secrets you are holding on to, the process of venting will be the thing that saves you from drowning. That's what desahogar means. Desahogo. You can hear there's songs that have this. I think there might be one by Vico C that's called desahogo. Or me desahogo. I'm pretty sure. Okay, so correcting myself, I made a few errors as always. Surprise to nobody. Errores de la teacher. La teacher. Quiero que tú me enseñes que es mi teacher. Teacher, here, se usa, it's used. It'll be pronounced like teacher. That's what they say to me in yoga, in my yoga class. Tú eres la teacher. Okay, I said, me sorprendió bastante al aprender que los partidos de Puerto Rico están divididos por. First of all, I thought my error was that this was going to need to be subjunctive, because usually if you say, I'm surprised that, but it changes the structure slightly if you do, I'm surprised to know, I'm surprised to learn. So I don't need subjunctive here, but I did need estar instead of ser. I'm bummed at myself with this one. I feel like my ser and estar, random subjunctive things where there are approximately 8,000 uses of the subjunctive. So I'm not surprised when I slip up on one of those, or prepositions where you use the wrong one. But I feel like usually I got a ser and estar. So too bad. Están divididos por. And also, I said at the end, and I know this was because I was really working hard to get this freaking thought out. It becomes much harder when you're thinking abstract, trying to express an abstract opinion. That's certainly where some of these finer points of grammar and rules that you've learned are just going to go out the window, because your brain's working really hard to express something that might even be hard for you to express in English because it's abstract and etc. But certainly is a challenge for you in your second language. So don't be surprised that errors come up. I'm not surprised they came up in these particular instances. So depende de, always in Spanish, when you're saying it depends on, the problem is that our English brain will always follow depends with on. Depends on whatever, depends on what they're going to do. Depends on her, depends on blah, blah, blah. Never depende in Spanish, never. It's always depende de. And I know that. And I feel like most of the time I do all right on that one. Depende de. But I was really, really like, you might have seen the smoke coming out of my ears because of how hard the gears were grinding to get out those thoughts. So depende de. Alrighty. Lastly, I want to end with this phrase, little grammatical structure here, which is really exciting to me because it's something that we actually use a lot in English. It's exciting to know that you can use this, exact phrase in Spanish. However, we have to learn a little bit about the grammar, how it's set up structurally in order to imitate this. So we've got hace que, which translates basically to it makes it so that, or makes them. You'll see that on the screen. I have an asterisk next to them because really it makes who, it depends on what the verb afterwards is saying, because hace que is just forming it makes blah. So it makes them blah, blah, blah. It makes you might be what's following afterwards. It makes us tired. All those different examples. So it can be whoever afterwards. You really have to look at the next verb. But in this case, the example that I pulled directly from the conversation is going to read nicely with makes them. So let's look at this. It's actually the verb that we went over today, tergiversar. Here we're going to see it in the subjunctive. I'll talk about that on the next slide. So we say, hace que tergiversen la información. And this is again, when talking about the primary political parties have the most media power. And so it makes it so that they twist or distort the information to kind of push their agenda, basically, or talk down on the other side, other beliefs, etc. He did that. Hace que tergiversen. He also used o favorezcan, another subjunctive after there, favorecer, in the subjunctive, favorezcan. Makes them distort the information. Hace que tergiversen la información. I need to put it on a flashcard as it is now because it's still a little bit funky with the emphasis. Okay, let's look at some other examples of this. Hace que, again, thinking of it as it makes it so that, or it makes them, makes you, makes whoever is following after this next verb. This always have to be followed by the subjunctive. Always, always, always the verb after hace que is going to be in the subjunctive. You heard Alfredo do it twice. He said tergiversen. God, y'all. If I'm not the perfect example of how much this can screw you up. Tergiversen, favorezcan, hace que sea. He used that as another point, talking about Puerto Rico's location and how it makes it a perfect point, military point, strategically, et cetera. So hace que sea un punto perfecto, estratégicamente hablando, strategically speaking, paramilitar, whatever. Okay, so you would have heard him twice in the episode use hace que, followed by subjunctive. I'm giving you some other examples not coming from the episode. Here we see hace que el pelo sea suave y brilloso. All right, so this is a way that you'd say it makes your hair smooth and shiny. Hace que el pelo sea suave y brilloso. Right. Notice that in Spanish, they're not big on using personal pronouns before body parts. So it'll sound like the hand, raise the hand. instead of maybe raise your hand. This is awful when I'm in yoga class and I have to do, for a while I had a couple students who were gringos, English speaking, who did not speak Spanish. So I had to teach the class bilingually the whole time, switching back and forth from Spanish to English. It was absolutely awful. Absolutely awful. But I would get confused here because I would go, I've had now about 3 years of teaching in yoga in Spanish. I would typically say things first in Spanish and then in English. And in English, they would come out like I would say, draw the belly button up and in, which in English, we would never call it the belly button. It would always be draw your belly button up and in, just a cue to help them engage their core. But in Spanish, that would always be lleva el ombligo hacia adentro, hacia arriba. Okay, el ombligo. It's not, they're not big on personal pronouns. And a lot of times it's kind of like how Spanish is structured, because you would say something like me duele. So the me already implies, duh, it's happening to me. It hurts me. Me duele el pie. Me duele el pie is like saying my foot hurts, but it's really the foot hurts me. That's what they're saying. So you don't need to say my foot hurts me because it's very redundant. Yes, we know. You're saying me duele, right? Okay, so hace que el pelo sea suave y brilloso. It's a little bit hard to get over this. I totally remember a friend telling me a joke, Puerto Rican friend telling me a joke, and he didn't use like I was waiting for a his or a her hand or whatever body part it was, and I didn't, and it kind of threw me off about who the heck body part we were talking about. There's a learning curve to this, but you do end up, as you just continue to have Spanish in your ears and eyes, inputting the language and also trying to produce it, this ends up becoming a little bit more intuitive over time. Just trust me on that. All right, final example of this hace que phrase. And here's where you're going to see where I finally have this justification for the way that I've translated as it makes it so that. Mi vecina, I should say this a little bit softer actually, because she might be home. Just kidding. Mi vecina no sabe parquearse. Y hace que yo tenga que parquearme mal. Mi vecina no sabe parquearse y hace que yo tenga que parquearme mal. My neighbor doesn't know how to park, and it makes it so that I have to park badly. It makes it so that in that case feels more natural. It makes me park badly. I could certainly say it like that, translate it like that, structure it like that. But here's a good example of it sounding like it makes it so that she parks badly all the time. She's always on the line or over it, and it makes it so that I have to be over the next line, etc. Okay, it makes it so that. There it is in subjunctive. Here I did throw yo in front of it because tenga could belong to he, she, or usted. So for an abundance of clarity, sometimes it's a good time to throw in yo into this equation. And that's it. Was it quick today? It feels so quick. All right, please like and follow. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube as Kerry B, KERRYBE_. And on Patreon, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, patreon.com/Spanish with Kerry, where you can have access to transcripts, fun vocab, some fun listening activities, etc., etc. We would so appreciate your support. So mil gracias. Thank you so much for listening. Let us know if you liked any of the vocab, some of the phrases from today. Feel free to comment on YouTube or leave a comment on, I think in Spotify, there's that question and answer option. Give us a 5-star rating if you can on Apple Podcasts. That might be for Spotify as well, so that more people can find this podcast. All right, guys, hasta la próxima.